Welcome to the Successful Athletes Podcast presented by TrainerRoad, where we interview successful athletes to make you a faster cyclist. And today we are joined by Amanda Harvey from up in Minnesota, I believe. Is that correct, Amanda?
Yep, Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Awesome. So thanks for joining us. We are going to talk today about, talk about a crazy transition. You're a track cyclist that decided to take on an event called Arrowhead 135. And if you're listening to this, you should Google it right now so then you can figure out what this event is. We'll obviously explain it throughout this, but talk about a huge transition from track racing. We're going to talk about all the training that you did to get ready for such an event like this, how you went through the setbacks, even just like took on such a big and scary goal, and then executing, of course, on race day too. So we'll go through all of it. But first, before we do that, if you want to find out more, obviously, about this podcast episode, you can head to the TrainerRoad forum, and we'll have an episode, or we'll have a thread all dedicated to this episode. Just search for Amanda's name, and you'll be able to find it there. And then also, if you want to become a faster cyclist like Amanda did, head over to TrainerRoad.com. It makes you faster. So with all that said, Amanda, do you mind introducing yourself and then telling us kind of like your background with like when you got into track cycling, and then we'll take it from there.
Sure. Yeah. I started racing at the Velodrome here in Minnesota about 5 years ago. I moved back to Minnesota, which is where I'm from originally. I had lived in Nashville for a while. And so I moved back here and saw that there was a really cool women's team that was doing great things at the track, and I wanted to be part of it. I had never heard of track racing before or ridden a fixed gear bike, but I figured it looked fun and I needed a way to exercise and meet new people and get friends who were interested in doing like active things. So I applied to be on that team and I didn't get on it, but there was a whole bunch of rejects and there was enough to make another team. So we were a team of rejects and started our own team to be at the track. So we had a good women's field there.
That's super cool. Building up like your own network that you had outside of that. And I assume that meant that all of you had like a common bond and you got along really well, right?
It worked out surprisingly well for, I think we had 11 or 10 people who just never met before. And by the end of the year, folks thought we had been friends for years. So that was really cool.
That's awesome. How cool. I feel like even though cycling in many cases is very much an individual sport, like even the event we'll talk about, the Arrowhead 135, many people, do it individually, and but still, it is a team sport in a lot of ways, and it's so nice to have that like support system and community. But that's, I guess, neither here nor there. Getting into Arrowhead 135, what in the heck made you decide to take on this race, and can you explain what this race is so then people have some context?
Yeah, Arrowhead 135 is a winter ultra race of 135 miles. You can walk, ski, or bike it, and you have 3 days to finish the race. And I first heard about it because someone named Sveta Vold wrote up a blog post about how she had given birth the month before and did this race while breastfeeding and pumping at all of the checkpoints. And it sounded crazy and like something I wanted to do for some reason without the baby. And so I spent a lot of time thinking about it and didn't really tell anybody about it, that I was thinking about it, because I was a pretty slow rider and I mostly enjoy like looking at my surroundings. And so taking on a 3-day event of 135 miles in the north of Minnesota in the middle of winter sounded really scary.
Yeah, so for those that don't know, the north of Minnesota in the middle of winter, it is fully snow covered, correct?
Oh, certainly. Yeah. Yeah, it's right on the Canadian border, and International Falls is where we start, and it goes through some of the coldest parts of the state of Minnesota, so through some swampy lowlands and everything.
So you took this on fat bikes, right?
Yep, I did the fat bike division, and because I'm not going to walk or ski that far.
Yeah, there's no way you can ride a normal bike on it. We're talking like that much snow. What sort of temperatures were you dealing with?
This year was actually pretty nice. So it was probably in the mid 20s during the day and got into the single digits at night. the year before they had a polar vortex, and so it was like negative 20 degrees at the start and only got colder. So I really lucked out this year.
That's still so cold, mid-20s. That's crazy.
It's
Um,
perfect because the snow gets to be like a really good consistency. So the colder it is, the firmer the snow is, and the easier it is to ride on it.
okay, that's fascinating. I'm a skier, and I know this may seem a bit tangential if you're never going to ride a bike on snow, but this is an important detail. So
Hmm.
since it's colder, there's less moisture, the snow is drier, and I assume that it packs down better and doesn't get sloppy. Is that what you're saying there?
Yeah, I had done a race earlier in winter, the Tuscobia race, and it was raining. And so the snow was just wet and sloppy, and it was really difficult to get any traction to get going.
Have
So
you ever
this was great.
Had you ever ridden a fat bike before? Like, and what was your familiarity with that, or even with like endurance sort of racing? You mentioned that you like to go on, more like scenic rides and that sort of stuff. But what was your familiarity with? Was this completely left field for you?
A few years before, I was invited to race a fat bike race by our shop sponsor, and they were helping to put the race on. And I borrowed my husband's fat bike and gave it a try and had my tire pressure up way too high. I fell down constantly. It was a huge mess. It was really warm, so the snow was soft. It took me over an hour to do 5K. It was miserable.
Oh, so that was your only experience going into this. That's so like,
That wasn't my first. It was like a few years before I did Arrowhead because I had to get a lot more experience with fat biking and riding in different snow conditions. There's a lot that takes to like dial in how to ride in the winter and be successful and not get too bogged down in like the minutia of tire pressure and having all your gear on your bike.
right.
So
But
I did a lot of.
prior to deciding you're going to take on the goal, like that was like your
Oh yeah,
experience with it, right?
that's true. Yeah, before I
Oh my
did chose to do this, I did not have good fat biking experiences.
It takes so much courage. Like, I've done like a variety of events, nothing remotely like that crazy at all, nothing that different. And I'm such a wuss with that. I love to stay in my lane, like, and just like do what I feel like I'm best at. And maybe I should branch out more, but this is like a really, that had to have taken a lot of courage. Are you scared to take it on, even though it sounded exciting and appealing to you? Was it scary to take it on for you?
Yeah, it was terrifying. I Most of my training was fueled by fear, and I just really wanted to finish the race and finish it in a way that I had fun and wasn't just dying at the end. I really was worried about all the equipment and gear and was what I was bringing correct? Was it right? There was a lot of things that made me anxious about this race, and especially like who was I to sign up for this race because I didn't have a lot of experience. I'm not a good winter camper. I tried to sleep outside one night when it was -5, and I came in after an hour because my feet were cold. So I didn't think I was tough enough.
So, what encouraged you to press sign up, so to speak, and to then make all the decisions afterward? What was enough to overcome that fear, or how did you overcome it?
I had one of my teammates from the track decided that she also wanted to do it, and we talked about it. And it sort of started in this quiet, like, I'd like to do Arrowhead one day way. And then at the end of it, we were like, we're going to sign up for it. So having the support of somebody else who I knew from track racing was going to be a great support, and we were going to ride together. And so if anything went wrong, I knew I had a buddy there to problem solve and fix things with me. So that was really encouraging. And then I also had another friend from the track who it was their, I think, fifth time attempting Arrowhead and decided that they were going to sign up for this too. And so I had friends who were going to be there. I just two, but at least I knew two people.
That's so the support system once again like is so helpful with that.
Yeah.
So like you prior to this, had you been training specifically or training with structure before, or was this like because that this is really I think when you started using TrainerRoad as well, right?
I had started the winter before doing like a crit plan because that matched best with the track racing. And then after my track season ended in August, I got real serious and like very diligent about doing the rolling century plan. That was the one I figured would go best with this race format. And I started my indoor workouts in September when the weather was still nice. And I was just like, I don't care. I'm going to do structure and I'm going to get better at riding my bike so that I can have a good time.
So what plan? So you followed the century plan. Did you do you remember if you followed low, mid, or high volume? And then how did you fit that into your schedule?
I did the low volume plan because I also wanted to spend some time on my bike outside practicing lighting fires and getting water boiled and having that time in my training to do the other things that are required of a winter ultra race. And so in order to actually get myself to do the training, I woke up early and did all my training in the morning. Even if I was going to do an outside ride when it was cold out, I try to get up in the dark and make sure that I got that done, because if I waited to the evening, I would make a lot of excuses and have a lot of reasons why I couldn't fit in my training that day. So I had to do it first thing. Otherwise I wouldn't do it at all.
Yeah. What do you do for work, and what's your family situation like?
I'm an auditor. So I do recovery auditing for PRGX and I audit for a grocery store. And at home, it's just me and my husband, my 2 dogs and 2 cats. So there isn't a lot of people depending on me, but at least my husband's really supportive of me. And when I wasn't feeling like training, he encouraged me to get on the bike and get going.
2 dogs and 2 cats is a lot of responsibility, though. they're fur children. It's
They
not
are.
as if, it's not as if you can, there's an absolute load there. And I think it's important to recognize it in the sense that like, that's a responsibility. They're carrying or they're living things that we care for.
That's true.
So,
Yeah.
So you would get up early and get in your training, and that way it was done and you didn't have to worry about the events of the day getting in your way later on. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, and you're following the low volume plan, which I think is really smart, because so a lot of the time we see people jump in and they say, I want to follow a mid volume plan or a high volume plan. And I usually suggest that everyone start with a low volume plan. And even then, in many cases, that's really sufficient for a lot of people. And it'll allow them to intermingle less structured rides if they want to work on skills, if they want to do group rides, if they want to do other things like that as well. And it's perhaps not as capacitive for them. So it'll allow them to be able to have more flexibility, because a plan followed with 100% adherence is like a lot better than a larger volume plan followed at like 60 or 70% adherence. You'll probably see more improvement with that. But the interesting thing is this is like a really long event. And I think that there's this association that gets tied in our minds with long duration event means I need to do high volume. I need to do more volume on the bike. You told me a story about this beforehand in a call where I think it was like you showed up at the event or there was some sort of call or something. And there was a guy that was like, had done it before, and he was telling everybody exactly how to train.
Yes.
Which is like that. And I think he followed along with that perspective, right? Of like big, long distance, you need to do it that way. Is that right?
Yeah, he definitely described what I was doing. Hour and a half rides indoors, we're not going to cut it. And you have to do 5-6 hour rides outside on the weekends, every weekend. And he said that about 2 weeks before the race, which was too soon to do anything about it if that was the wrong way to train. But I feel like the way I trained through TrainerRoad was perfect. It worked out really well for me.
Yeah, that's the thing. On race day, you're using energy systems. And in a race like this, that's predominantly aerobic because of the fact that it's, so long, you're spending your time at a lower intensity.
Mm-hmm.
It's about stressing that energy system in a very strategic way. And you can do that in less time with the right amount of intensity and the right structure and everything else. I mean, that's why Chad's put all the work into it. And you can check out the plans, TrainerRoad.com, see the century plan, the very thing that Amanda followed in this case. So, so did you, amidst all of that, did you hit any setbacks with your training? Like, I'm sure there were hard days. Uh, how did you overcome the hard days, and did you encounter any obstacles when you were going through the training process?
Yeah. One of the other winter races I did, I mentioned the Tuscobia 80 race. I had some knee issues come up at the end of that race because I didn't have my bike fit right. And so those sort of lingered on past Arrowhead. And that was about a month before Arrowhead. And then that whole month of January, I was just really tired. And I did another short fat bike race, and I think I came in last because I was just beat. And I think I wasn't like training for those races. I just like threw them in there. And so I think it was a little more than I could handle. And so it got me really concerned that I was just going to flame out at the first checkpoint at Arrowhead and just be really tired.
So so you are like, it's funny because a lot of the time we put these races on our calendar and we're like, I'm going to put that on there because it's going to be a good confidence boost and a stepping stone for the big event. But that does happen sometimes. Like our B races, they don't go well.
Yeah.
And that fills us with like, oh no, I'm not prepared. So how did you overcome that doubt that was creeping in from those events?
I looked into tapering and what that involved and what I should do, and then was trying to just remind myself to go my pace and it's not a crit. I don't have to go fast right out of the start. I'm not going anybody else's pace except for my friend Brenda. We're in it together. And so if one of us is pushing harder than the other, we can we talked about it so that we stayed together. And I think also like shifting my mindset on I'm not there to get first or anything because I'd never done it. You never know what's going to happen with the snow or the cold or anything could go wrong with your bike. You could get hit by a snowmobile. I don't know. Hopefully not. So I thought if I just finish this race, no matter what place I get, it's going to be a success.
Awesome. So you went back to the roots of your goals and where you were really at rather than letting the fear of those races overtake you and kind of shift your focus from it. Smart. So with the training side of things, did you look into like what you would need to do on race days, I should say, because it's not just one day. But did you look at what you needed to do? Like, how did you figure out like the pacing plan and what intensity you'd be riding at for the whole race?
Yeah. So the Arrowhead website has the checkpoint times for every person that's done it. And so I took like the last 5 years of times of people and I put them into a spreadsheet. And so I measured, I only took the results of people who finished the race because I wanted to make sure that if somebody was going way too fast and they couldn't finish the race, I didn't want to include them in my analysis. And so I averaged out like how long in general people took to get from checkpoint to checkpoint. And your time at the checkpoint, I always hear you should try and minimize it, but you're going to take how much time you're going to take to just recover from that. And so I was trying to build in like this is the average of how long it takes people generally. And so these are my goals to get, between 5 and 6 hours for this and 8 to 10 hours for this section. That's how I started it.
That's awesome. That's a very me approach of putting everything into a spreadsheet and then organizing it like that. But that's a good point because I mean, it's tough to figure out exactly how fast it would go. I would assume it's in particular with fat biking and snow, and the snow conditions could change. And so normalizing that across the different years that you had in the race probably made it so that it was more representative of what you could do.
Yeah, I was trying to make sure that I didn't just only take good years information. So in case things went really bad, I would have an idea of what to expect.
So let's get into the equipment and how you figured all of that out. First of all, the bike is entirely different. No longer riding a track bike, right? Like a fat bike. So did you go through a process of figuring out fat bike tires? Because that's like the main thing is tire pressure. And which tires did you run and how did you go through that whole process?
Yeah, I think I had on, oh my goodness, I'm going to forget this. So I had a sponsorship for my bike. So Otso is my sponsor for the winter, and they lent me a Voitech. And so it came on with the stock tires, which I think are Jumbo Gyms, and they're a 4-inch tire. For Tuscobia, I rode studded tires because and a studded fat bike tire is heavy. So you really want to take that into consideration. But since the temperatures were going to be right at freezing and there's going to be a lot of road crossings, I wanted to be sure I wasn't going to slip on ice because that'll ruin your day. But for this race, there aren't a lot of road crossings. It looked like the temperatures were going to be well below freezing. And so I didn't ride studs. I had a tubeless setup just in case it got super warm so that I could ride a super low pressure and not worry about pinch flaps. And part of it is like throughout the day, just at the beginning of the race, especially just riding on the course, checking your tire pressure. How do you feel? Are you feeling squirrely? Then let some air out. If you're feeling too bouncy, then you need to let some air out. So it was a little test ride at the beginning helped.
Yeah, I'm sure. And I'm sure that was something that you changed as you were riding more and more. Doing that low volume plan allowed you to be able to ride outside and be able to kind of test and bracket and kind of figure out where you needed to be on that pressure. What about anything else that you do differently to the bike? Like if I was to go buy a fat bike now, how would it be different than the bike you rode, or would it be just the same?
I think it'd be the same. I would definitely recommend tubeless tires for just getting your air pressure in better, like dial that in better. I think the biggest part of the gear is just where to put all of it on your bike. That's really difficult. So I had a frame bag from Revelate that they make specially for the Voitech, so it fit perfectly in there. And like, where am I going to put my sleeping bag and my sleeping pad, all my extra clothes, having your warm mittens and a puffy jacket in a really accessible place, just in case something went wrong and I got cold, I had to stop. I think those gear questions are the hardest. Like the fat bike is great. There's a lot of conversation on forums about like below zero grease. I did put in like below zero sealant into the tubes, and that worked out for me in this case.
I hadn't thought about that. That's something, because otherwise the sealant could freeze, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Then you just have like little rocks, basically sealant rocks bouncing around in your tire. Do you remember what sealant you used for that?
I think it was Orange Seal. They have a 0 degree.
Smart.
Sealant.
I hadn't thought of that. So where did you pack all the stuff? That's a great point too. Like, and first of all, what were you carrying with you in terms of clothing on you and then on the bike?
Yeah, on me, I had on at the start, I had on a thermal legging, 2 layers of wool socks. I had 45 North boots on, and I brought along a down skirt because it just keeps your like thighs and butt a lot warmer than just snow pants or anything else will do. I had a wool t-shirt on, and then over the top of that was where I carried my Camelback. And then I had a jacket, like a winter cycling jacket on top of the Camelback to help keep my water not frozen.
It's so funny. Usually we're always like, how do I keep it more cold?
Yeah. Just like put hot water in there.
Yeah. How did you stop it from freezing? Like even one thing I've had a problem with skiing before is with a hydration pack is the water freezing from not on my back, but in the hose as it's in between the reservoir and getting to me. How did you stop it from freezing?
You have to blow the water back in. So you take a drink and then you just have to like and blow it back into the hose to clear out the water from the mouthpiece area.
Yeah.
And I have definitely had that freeze on me a number of times, and I'm just carrying a whole bunch of water around for no reason.
Yeah. Okay, that's a good tip. That I've never That's going to help me a ton with backcountry skiing because now I can carry a
Yeah.
reservoir. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really helpful. I keep doing it now in the summertime. I'm like, why did I just blow it back? I don't need to do that.
What about gloves? What did you use there? And did you have any like hand protection on the bike too for cold
Yeah,
hands?
I had like thin gloves and pogies from Wolf Tooth. They're like a single track pogie, so they fold down so you can get your hands in and out easy, or they can go up if it's like colder out. But I had them folded down the whole time since it wasn't that cold. The
And what are
pogies help.
those to like explain for those that
Yeah,
don't know?
they're like an external mitten for your handlebars. So they plug in on the end of your handlebars and cover to like the cables to your stem. And so you can just put your hands in there and it blocks the wind and rain. They're really helpful for winter riding so that you don't have to wear, like, keeping your hands warm is so hard. And being able to eat, because it's such a long race, you have to eat and you can't, like, taking mittens on and off the whole time is pretty annoying if you have to do that.
So that allow you to use pretty thin gloves then, and you didn't have to wear like a bulky layer on top.
Right. Yeah. I had thin gloves. And then if I got cold or I had a little mitten, like a thin wool mitten, I could put on top of that too.
Got it. Did you have anything like a buff or anything for like protection around your neck from the cold? And then what did you
Yeah.
wear on your head to keep yourself warm too?
I had a hat, a thin little wool hat that I got at Tuscobia, and then and a neck gaiter to keep my neck warm. And then I wore a helmet. You don't always have to for these races, but it just helps me because I train with a helmet on. I might as well wear one. But it
Yeah.
had a light on the top so I could see in the dark.
Oh yeah, that's also an important detail because I assume the days are pretty short for this race, like in terms of
Yeah,
daylight.
that's true. It's like a month after solstice. So they're
Yeah.
getting longer, but still not that long.
Yeah. So what do you like roughly sunset would be just sometime around like 4 p.m. maybe?
I think it would probably be like 4:30 because I finished on the second day around 4 and the sun was just starting to set, I believe.
Wow.
So we started at 7 a.m. and it was pitch black at 7 a.m. And so we got a ride with the sunrise, which was really beautiful.
That's awesome. What sort of stuffs and you mentioned that you had to have a sleeping bag and a sleeping pad. Did you have to just make your own camp along the way for this race?
Some people do, and you can do the race unsupported, which means that you can't go inside to any of the checkpoints, but they don't let you do that your first year, which I think sounds reasonable. And so you have to have at least negative 20-degree sleeping bag and a bivy and an insulated sleeping pad. But you can stay at the second checkpoint, which is a set of cabins. And so I was able to sleep in a bunk bed for a few hours, which was really nice.
Oh, yeah, that would be nice. What were you carrying on you in terms of provisions? Like, we'll get into nutrition right after this, but like all the other equipment that you were carrying on you, whether that was the sleeping bag or the sleeping pad, I don't know if you had a cook stove or anything like that.
Yeah, you have to have a stove and a pot that carries at least a pint of water and fuel, matches, or a lighter to light it. This was part of my shakedown rides was I found out my stove leaked gas all over.
Oh no.
So for Christmas, I got a new Esbit stove, and they're really small, and they're like solid state fuel tabs that you can light. I brought a little titanium tea kettle.
Smart.
And you have to finish the race with 3,000 calories. So I had a little jar of peanut butter that I brought along with me. That was my 3,000 calories.
Cool.
And I had a munchie bag on my handlebars that were full of like Cliff Flocks and bacon and date balls made with peanut butter and oatmeal that carried me through most of it.
Since it was lower intensity, you could probably tolerate foods that had like higher fat content like that, right?
Yeah, and it's important to be able to eat something that's able to be eaten when it's frozen. Otherwise, you're going to have a hard time. Or people also will like transition food into pockets to warm them up before they eat. But all my stuff worked out good that way.
And that's something that you tested leading up to the race in your shakedown rides, I assume as well.
Yeah. definitely testing out what was good food to eat. I made little rice bars that I then froze and brought with me. And then those did not turn out good. So I ate one bite and was like, I will hold on to these until I'm desperate, and not until then will I eat them. So that was a lesson learned.
Did you have to like heat up the liquid in your, or did you have to keep anything, or did you put anything intentionally hot, like into your reservoir? Or I don't know if you carried a bottle as well.
Yeah, on the bottom of my bike, I strapped on a thermos where in the morning I put tea in there. And then at the first checkpoint, I think I filled it up with tea, and then I used it for lunch. At the last checkpoint on the second day, the only thing they had was like whiskey and hot water. And so I was fully planning on boiling water myself to make noodles. I brought some ramen along, but they had hot water, and I took advantage of the whiskey after that too. It was a great time.
That's funny. What other, so you had the stove, you had a sleeping bag, and you had a sleeping pad. Did you have anything else like a bivy or a tent or anything like that?
I had my bivy, and you have to have so part of it is having like flashing lights. You have to have lights on the front and the back. So like red flashing lights on the front and back. I have to have like a reflective vest because the Arrowhead State Trail is a snowmobile trail. So there's a lot of snowmobile traffic on the trail. You have to be visible for them. And it's a big part. At least I was really grateful. Everyone was really respectful on the trail of us.
Yeah. What did you carry for like spares and tools to do any sort of repairs?
I carried 2 extra tubes, which gets bulky when you have
to be heavy
fat bike tubes. I was not willing to risk anything. So then I had my multi-tool, my tire levers. I had a pump with me, and then toothpicks in case my sealant closed up the valve core area. Also a valve core remover, just in case. I'm trying to think of what else I brought. Just your usual, like, regular tools that you'll need to fix anything that goes wrong on your bike.
Where'd you carry all of that stuff? Was it strapped to your bike or strapped to your person?
That was all on my bike. So I had a little, like a mag tank from Revelate on the top tube. It was a top tube bag that had some of those essentials, and then also extra batteries for my lights and extra lights and things like that in it too.
This is like part wilderness survival, part bike race. It's like, like when you think about it, there's so few bike races where you have to carry this much stuff and figure out where to carry it. And man, like that's all process in and of itself, and probably intimidating, I assume, like thinking I have to figure all this out.
Yeah. Figuring out like how to carry something, and then I thought I was doing great, and then I put my light on my bike, and then my sleeping bag was blocking my front light, and so then I had to figure out another solution to having light and my sleeping bag on the front. So it was a lot of trial and error and making mistakes, and then riding kind of in the dark accidentally. So didn't always go well.
Now there's like one thing about taking on the goal that takes a ton of courage. And training for that goal takes a lot of courage every training session. But then there's another thing of like actually showing up for it. And I'm sure it had to be intimidating. Like such a big race with unknown, who knows what could happen with the weather. And it's a relatively unfamiliar format for you. Like the tons of things going into it. Did you feel pre-race nerves? And how did you manage those?
Had a lot of pre-race nerves. It was like a 4.5 hour drive up to International Falls. I was worried about so many different things, from like my body not being able to handle it to my bike just falling apart. And when you get there, it's a small town. And so you can tell the people who are there for Arrowhead, it draws an international crowd too. And they all seem to know each other, which can be really intimidating when you're new and you don't really know that many people. And there's a pre-race meeting the night before and a spaghetti dinner, and it was nice. They go over all the important things, and they have a doctor there to talk to you about the do's and don'ts of frostbite and all that. And so just being there and being a part of it, I really like question like, do I belong here? Because I don't know that many people. I know the people I came with essentially. And so it was pretty nerve-wracking. But once you're out on the trail, everyone was really friendly. I fell down trying to get bacon out of my munchie bag and had a skier pass me and was checking in to make sure things were okay. And I just laughed because I just like tumbled over like a little turtle. And then when I got to the finish, like people who had finished before me were there cheering me on. And so it's nice to see how like those nerves like shifted throughout the race to being like, it was a really supportive environment.
Even for small events, I think it's not uncommon to feel that sort of anxiety, like I don't belong. Sure. Right.
Yeah.
And I bet a lot of people feel that. And it's something that we don't openly talk about a whole lot. I still feel that at a lot of races that I go to, where it might even be like a regular weekly race that I go to all the time. And I still struggle with that a lot of the time. Like, oh, should I be up here? And even like sometimes you find yourself in a race situation where you're doing better than you thought. And it's like, oh, do I belong here? And there's that question that the self-doubt creeps in like that. Yeah. But hindsight can definitely help. How did you manage it in the moment? Did you just revert back to your original goals like you did before and stick to those? Or
I think talking about it with my friends and my husband who were there helps to just like externalize the feeling, get it out. And so that I'm not just sitting inside being like, I'm nervous. So it was nice to have someone at least close to me to be able to talk to. And I think just remembering that I trained a lot and I am a capable person and I can do things that are hard. Because I've done it before and I've done them with my friends before. And so having that as a reminder was really helpful too.
Awesome. Let's talk about the event itself. You started off with your partner, correct? And your intent was to race as a team all the way through this?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I'm cheating here because I read ahead. There's a fantastic article on the Radivist actually, where you share all about your experience at this race and kind of like vignettes, also just more personal vignettes along with this whole process. And it's a fantastic article, and we'll be sure to link down below to that one. It's just wonderful. But tell me about like the pacing side of things. Like you said, ideally you'd be able to hold the same pace as your partner, but it didn't really start out, or didn't even from the beginning, it wasn't that way, right?
Yeah, it didn't work out quite that way. In the past, Brenda has always been a faster rider than me and was usually the one waiting for me at the top of hills, but she moved to Arizona probably a year before the race. And so we hadn't ridden together a whole lot since then to be able to like gauge where we were at with our training, like how we would ride together. And so she was also struggling with another injury from another race and ended up being in a lot of pain before the first checkpoint. And she really struggled. She powered through a whole lot and it was tricky. Like catching a good line in the snow was hard. And I'm just impressed and amazed that she towed the line from Arizona to northern Minnesota. And so it was a struggle for us riding together. And then at about 50 miles is when she dropped out. And so then after that, being by myself, it was nighttime when she dropped. And so then I was just by myself in the North Woods in the dark. Oh. And so that was an interesting experience. And I had a lot of conflicting feelings about not finishing the race with Brenda, since we said that we would together. But in the end, we all have to ride our own race.
On the Ask a Cycling Coach podcast just recently, we had Kate Courtney on, and she said that a race is the story you tell yourself. In your mind, I'm sure you had told yourself the story of the race being one where you had a partner and suddenly you didn't have one. So the story had changed. Or did you anticipate riding alone? And
It did
how did
not.
you manage that mid-race like audible? That's a big shift.
Hmm. Yeah, it was hard mentally to think about, like, did I abandon Brenda? What did that, like, I made sure she had, like, we stopped at a place where she could get a ride out. I didn't just leave her in the wilderness. But having those feelings of abandoning my friend, and could I have done something different that would have helped her finish? Um, it was really tricky. And so I kind of sat with those thoughts um, on the like 20 hilly miles that I had to the next checkpoint. And I think having that quiet time to really ponder and think through it and think about how, like, well, maybe I'm alone right now, but I have notes from my friends of support in my bike bags. I am not actually alone out on the trail anymore.
Awesome. That's cool. What good friends, right?
They
That
are.
sort of
I'm
stuff.
very lucky.
Yeah, that's awesome. So the you make it through like the checkpoints. What other obstacles did you come across in the race? And then we'll get into like the highlights and the good parts as well.
Definitely my lowest part was the section between checkpoints 2 and 3. I heard it was hilly, and it was. And they're really steep up and down hills. And so I had my like few hours of sleep at night in the cabin. I couldn't get to sleep. And so I found a book in the cabin, which was Bridges of Madison County. And I started reading the book to fall asleep. And it worked. So I got a few hours of sleep. And then at maybe 5 a.m., I got up and like ate breakfast and got going again. And those hills, like, they're not kidding about them. And uh,
There's got to be a
they,
unique aspect to them with a fat bike in the snow, right? Like, because there's just momentum is just gone basically.
yeah,
When you mention it's a snowmobile trail too, snowmobiles don't actually really pack down the snow; they kind of like churn it up.
yeah,
So was that tough? Like constantly fighting the up and down roller coaster without getting the usual momentum you get from the downhill?
yeah. It was like really great if you could get halfway up the next hill, and then you always have to be aware of snowmobiles, and if one's coming by, you're like, I have to find a new line around their track.
Mm-hmm.
It got pretty demoralizing to not be able to, like, so I walked up so many hills. So pushing my bike up all those hills, it was tough. And I was by myself. I passed one runner who seemed very delirious, but it looked like she had dropped a light, and I was able to bring it back to her, which was good.
Mm.
But when I finally saw my friend who had come to take pictures, I saw them in the distance, and I knew that I was close to the last checkpoint, and I just started crying, and I wasn't expecting to cry, but I was just so happy. I was like, they couldn't be more than 2 miles away from the checkpoint, because by that point my computer had died. I didn't charge it all the way, and so I had no idea how far along in the race I actually was.
Oh wow. Yeah, you're like, so that's like disorienting and you're already probably kind of on the verge of losing it, I assume, like
Yeah, it's
riding,
pretty tired.
being pretty exhausted and riding at night and everything else. But what about the highlights? Because your finish is actually a very good finish, like even, relatively to the field. Can you share what the finish was? And then we can kind of step back into the highlights.
Oh, I don't remember where I finished. I have it written down, I think. Um, but I managed to, after that third checkpoint, I ate my ramen and had a shot of whiskey and was feeling good. There was dogs at the checkpoint, so I got to pet dogs. I think the third checkpoint, which is the Surly tent, was a huge highlight for me. Um, and then after that, there is one hill, and it's called Wake 'em Up Hill, and it will wake you up. And then after that, it's just like flat, smooth sailing through swampy bits. And I was feeling really good. I had like hot food in my belly. I was like eating my Advil for my knee pain to go away, and I was cruising. And on that section, I just on the last section, I got fourth. My time was the fourth fastest overall.
Wow.
But since I had like taken a break and slept at night, I didn't finish super fast. But
super impressive. The fourth overall, like or fourth amongst, like that's and aside from that, I think the biggest the biggest thing there is when there's a huge audible thrown at us where we have a partner, then suddenly we don't have the partner, or like when your race just doesn't go as planned. Being flexible enough and being courageous enough to then be like, all right, new plan, and like stick with it mid race. That's really hard to do. Really hard to do for everybody. We see it at every level of sport, whether it's with amateurs or professionals at the highest level. That's a really tough thing. And that's something that you did. So that's super impressive. Looking back on your training for such a long event, do you feel like your training was like what you did in terms of interval training and everything else was a good way to go for this?
For sure. I think it really helped knowing like what a steady state effort felt like and knowing what my limit felt like, because my fat bike doesn't have a power meter, because I don't know how well that would hold up in the cold. Yeah. So I really had to do my indoor training and get used to what that felt like in my body, and then translate that onto my fat bike, and how when I knew I was pushing myself too hard, going up hills, I had to take a break and be like, it's okay, get your heart rate down, and then know when I was feeling good and this is a good tempo for me to stay at. It was really helpful to do the indoor training that I did.
Yeah, it has so much application there just because you can get rid of all the distracting circumstances and everything else and just focus on the effort. And it really helps tune that RPE. I feel like the rate of perceived exertion. So,
yeah.
So Amanda, if somebody's listening to this right now, a cyclist looking for motivation or looking for whether it's encouragement or guidance to be able to complete something hard like this, what would you share in terms of what did you learn from this event that you would share for these athletes to encourage them to take something on like this?
Yeah, I think just being brave and trusting yourself. So I heard a lot of advice from people who had done this race before, and I questioned what my gear was like. But then knowing that like I have trained in this way, this is what's good for me. So what's good for everyone, what's good for this person who's finished first so many times might not be what's good for you. And so just being able to recognize that the individuality in your preparation and what it takes to do the race is okay, and that your way of doing it is going to work for you, but also being flexible to hearing feedback and making mistakes. I think part of what made my race successful was those shakedown rides and going out and making mistakes and riding on bad snow and feeling what that felt like. The thing I love about fat biking is you fall over a lot and you fall into snow for the most part, and it's nice. And so failure doesn't hurt as bad.
And you have plenty of chances to fail with all the tip overs in the snow, right?
That's true. Yeah. Plenty of chances to fail, and it's great. It's more fun. And riding with friends, I'd say just get a buddy to do your training with or to do the race with, whether it's something big or small outside your comfort zone. Having somebody there to support you unconditionally, no matter how you finish, it was really key.
Awesome. Amanda, this is great. Thank you so much for doing this, and congrats on taking on something so bold and so courageous. I don't know I would have the courage to do that. If people want to find out more about this, they can head to the forum, like I said, and they can go to trainerroad.com/forum and search for Amanda Harvey's name. But also, can they get in touch with you somehow, Amanda, and follow you or stay in touch?
Sure. I'm on Instagram at Mandy042. It's MANDI 042. And awesome. That's pretty much it.
Cool. And then we'll have the links below to, like I said, the article from the Radivist and some great photos as well that have come along from that whole process of training and and executing on the event. Really cool stuff. Amanda, thank you so much. If anybody listening to this wants to find out more about how to become a faster cyclist like Amanda, head over to trainerroad.com. You can build out a training plan just like Amanda had for whatever event you have, and you can do that even long before you sign up. You can check that out. So go over to trainerroad.com, play around with Plan Builder, see what it could do for you, and we will talk to you all on the next episode. Thanks, everybody.